So just a little bit about me. I'm an independent game developer in a small indie team based out of Brooklyn called Untame. There are 4 of us, and we've been working for 3.5 years on a game called Mushroom 11, which is shown here in a few GIFs. So this is a puzzle platformer game. It's pretty experimental in terms of controls. You control an amorphous blob by deleting parts of yourself, and for each cell that's deleted, it will regrow on the surface. Because it has such an experimental control mechanic, we've had a really difficult time trying to make a very intuitive tutorial system to teach people how to play this game. Just because when most people come to like a puzzle platformer or a platformer in general, they assume that they can move and jump and completely control their creature. And in this game, there is no such control. You don't have any force over this thing. So we've basically been taking it to a bunch of shows, as many shows as possible, to get feedback. And this is sort of this iterative loop we've gone into for about 2.5 years of trying to come up with puzzles and solutions to, effectively teach people how to play our game. We've had A/B tests at these conferences. We've had builds where we can switch out puzzles on people and to sort of observe what people were doing. And it's just been a hugely long process. But I did come away with some takeaways that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully they'll help you when you're thinking about making your own games, or at least thinking about using games as a way to teach people. So one of the first things is knowing what you want to teach when you're designing puzzles, which seems really obvious, but it's amazing how sometimes when you're putting something together, you might just think it's cool and you don't really have a reason. So this screenshot is an area of the game where we were having trouble. People were struggling through it, and we were trying to figure out how to fix it so people could get through it. And what we realized when we tried to come up with solutions was that we didn't have a clear one specific thing we wanted to teach. So we had to take a step back and realize, okay, what's the most important thing we wanted people to understand by going through these series of platforms and moving elevators? And what we discovered was that we wanted to teach people that you have a shifting center of mass. In our game, if you undercut parts of your mushroom, you can tumble backwards and forwards. And so once we knew that, we were able to design a puzzle that's much better at teaching that. So we knew that we could basically collapse these mini platformers beforehand and turn them into some type of stair, and that way people can, are sort of forced to observe what happens when you try to sculpt yourself into the stair and then tumble down onto the elevator. Another thing is that it's really important to give people a safe place to play, especially when they're learning something that's new or cognitively intense. So we have this backwards moving conveyor belt that you would fall into, and it was basically to test players' ability to move in a sort of comfortable manner before we let them play other puzzles. And as sort of an afterthought, we put these spikes on a wall just to reinforce the direction we wanted them to move to. And the funny thing is the spikes are actually not very dangerous in our game because you're constantly deleting yourself. So it's basically like holding a mouse on the wall. But it looks really dangerous, and it was freaking people out, and they weren't able to stop and think about what they had to do, and it was hurting their ability to play the game. So of course, taking that out gave them a safe place so they can just focus on the task ahead of them and not have to even think about what might be harmful in the game. Another important thing is not to distract your players away from their goal, which is another thing that seems really obvious, but so we had this puzzle here, and we had no problems with it. Almost everybody got it right away. And if they didn't get it right away, they would immediately get it on the second time by failing. They would observe what would happen, and they would have this aha moment. So we never really paid much attention to this puzzle, and we gave the art assets to this artist, and he was doing a final level of polishing where he was putting all this beautiful detail on buildings, and so he put these fire escapes on this building. And of course, when we played it, everyone failed this puzzle, right? Because we have this wrong call to action. Struggling is okay as long as you know if it's the reason behind it. One of the issues we had in our game is that for new players, when they're trying to move, what will happen is they'll delete parts of themselves and they'll split themselves up, so they'll have little trails of mushrooms behind them. And when you delete cells, they could grow in any one of those mushrooms. So what would happen is players would try to move, and their mushroom would get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then all of a sudden it would disappear, and they'd have this giant mushroom behind them, and they would be like, wait, what's going on? Why did that happen? So we knew we had to draw attention to this, to tell them that, like, if you leave pieces behind, they can grow, so you have to be aware that that's a thing you need to manage. So very early on, we had this tunnel system, and we decided to split it, so it's really easy for players to leave pieces behind this tunnel. And we basically had a camera area that would focus on the intersection of those tunnels. So if you left mushrooms pieces behind, you would actually not be able to progress until you deleted all of it. And while players sort of struggled to get through this area, it definitely helped so that when that happened, when they would like move and then the mushroom would like delete and grow somewhere else, they understood why. It wasn't like, why did the game do that? It was like, oh, it's because I didn't like manage my mushroom system well enough. So this is a math question that's been used in a lot of studies. It's actually pretty famous. The interesting thing about this question is that even though it's a very simple math question, if you give it to college students, about 80% of them will get the answer incorrect. If you give them this question, only 30% will get the answer correct. The question is exactly the same, but it's harder to read. And these statistics are coming from a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is amazing, and if you haven't read it, you really should, because it's great. But basically, humans, we're like these great interpretive machines, and we'll come up with a solution really quickly in our head, but it takes a lot to have us second check that solution. And this happens in game design all the time. We sort of see this as players finding a solution that seems legitimate to them in their mind, and they will continually stick with that solution over and over and over again and not try anything else to your like complete frustration. So we had this puzzle, and it was trying to teach something really abstract, which was that if you push through your mushroom, you would fall into this lava pit because you're not actually pushing, you're deleting. But unfortunately, people would look at this and they would think, well, of course, I would push through and fall in. That's what you should do. So we had to approach it differently. So we basically decided to take the entrance to the tunnel and put it on the top. And that way, I mean, this had the same effect of writing that math problem in a really hard language, right? If you look at this, there's no way you can actually push your mushroom down because you're going to just fall right into the lava pit. And by doing this, instead of like having 40 people fail and quit our game, almost nobody failed. Everyone got it. It was pretty crazy. And then the last bit is that priming players when ramping up difficulty seems to help. So this is outside of our tutorial system. This is when level 2 and 3, when we were starting to make puzzles harder. We noticed that for some reason, people were really struggling with the very first puzzle. And at first we contemplated maybe making it easier, maybe the puzzle itself was too hard, but then we realized that we hadn't actually sort of reminded people that they could use their mushroom to clamp onto something in quite a while. So we added a very small puzzle beforehand that sort of reinforced the idea, so they had the notion that you can do that, and by doing that, we didn't have to actually decrease the difficulty. We could still keep it really tough, but people knew what to do, and they would try, and most people were able to get through it fine. So final takeaways, just to overcap: knowing what you want to teach, teaching one thing at a time and leaving space between that so people have the ability to master what you're trying to teach, giving players a safe place to play, not distracting your players from their goal. Struggling is okay as long as you know the reason for it, and players will linger on the first solution that seems to fit in their mind, and priming players when you ramp up. So thanks very much, guys.